Layton.
And I'm Luke Miller. Welcome to Tea Time in Olympia. Today we're going to learn about the personal journeys of Amy and Dr. Ellen Hardin.
So let's jump on in.
Hi, I'm Lucas Miller. Welcome back to Tea Time in Olympia. I'm here today with my co-host, Amy Layton, who's going to tell us about her transition, her trans journey, and her truth. Hi, Amy.
Hello.
So for starters, tell us your pronouns.
Well, I use she and her, as most trans women do. Some trans women don't, but I use she and her.
Okay. And you identify as a trans woman.
Yes, I am a trans woman. That means that I was assigned male at birth, but I live every day and know myself to be a woman.
And so when did you first realize that your gender identity was something different than what society had, assigned to you?
Well, I guess I learned very young that I was different. I just always felt different. And I guess one of my earliest memories is throwing a fit at a Toys R Us for a my size princess dress-up costume, because I thought it would be magical and turn me into a little girl. And I just, I wanted to be a girl so bad. And I remember throwing this fit and Mom being like, no, we can't get that for you. But then she finally did. And I was able to go home, and I felt pretty when I tried it on. And, I got made fun of, so I put it away because I didn't want to be made fun of a little bit, because I had an older brother, and some older brothers do that, I don't hold it against him, He was just being an older brother.
So when did you first start to come out to other people to, assert that identity as a girl or as a woman?
Well, let's see. I came out to my mother when I was 12, and it was the early to mid 90s, so there wasn't a lot known back then. And my mother, it was in a car driving on the way to school, and I told her, and she said, "You're going to have to do this alone." And, I really felt bad for a while after that. But I don't hold it against her. It was the times. Not a lot of people understood what trans was, and so she told me to wait 5 years and see where life takes you. So I did, and it just the need to be who I was, to be seen for who I am, just kept building and building. And 15 years later, actually, when I was 27, I started my transition from male to female on the outside, so other people could see what I could see. And here I am. I'm 30 years old. Yes, I'm an old bat, but I know I'm not an old bat. But,
I was going to say, you're younger than me. So what were some of the first steps you took in your transition process?
Well, I followed the W path, which I had read online for many years, because I started researching when I was in high school, trying to figure out everything I could and understand everything I could about being trans and what trans was. Because that's when I realized I wasn't alone out there. I just knew that I couldn't start transition at that time.
Right.
So my first steps were to go and see a therapist for a few months, kind of get reassured that I wasn't crazy.
Right.
Because I knew I wasn't crazy. And then I got a letter from my therapist and saw my doctor, who required a letter to start hormone therapy. And after signing a bunch of paperwork and getting some lab tests done, I was able to start hormone replacement therapy. And it's been just about 2.5 years. It'll be 2.5 years in September, or September 8th.
Okay.
So big day, September 8th, 2.5 years. And my life is so much better. I can honestly say that I was at the end of my rope. I was at the end of my life. I attempted suicide a couple hundred times. There was a year or two, where I was playing Russian roulette twice a week. And the final straw was I loaded a fully loaded gun and put it to my head, and it didn't go off. But when I pointed it to the ground, it went off. So that was my clue from the cosmos or karma or whatever the energy of this universe is, to go ahead and live my truth and be true to who I was.
Well, I'm glad you're still with us. Tell us a little more about your coming out process. When did you start to tell other people, and how did they respond?
Well, a lot of people were uncertain about what transgender meant, and so I came out on Facebook to everyone because I was like, okay, that's the last straw. I'm coming out. I'm giving you a little bit of notice. I'm going to be starting transition soon, and we're going to go from there. And here's my new name and pronoun, or not new name, but the name I felt most represented me. And I came out, and I did lose a couple people in my life. There were some people that couldn't get past the pronouns or anything like that, so I kind of had to work with them to be able to get to the right pronoun usage.
Right.
And kind of get them to understand what it's like to be misgendered. It's like someone calling you by a different name and insisting that that's your name from now on. And that's it. You can't change your name. But, so it was a little difficult, but I was actually pretty lucky because a lot of my family members stood by me and were really, really loving and accepting of me.
Good.
They didn't necessarily understand what transgender meant, but they loved me, and they wanted to see me be happy, so they were okay with it.
Yeah. I'm guessing there probably weren't as many resources back then.
No, there weren't, actually. In fact,
especially for families, I imagine. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I was in high school, I went and I saw some therapists that a place that rhymes with Roop Ralph.
Okay.
And back in the 90s, it was actually the early thousands when I was in high school. But they didn't really understand. They thought I was crazy. They told me I was crazy, and that there was no real hope for me, and they didn't really seem like they cared. But I've heard from many people that they have changed, and that those doctors aren't there anymore, and that there are more understanding and loving, caring people there.
That's what I hear. It's they've been really doing their best to keep up. So what do you think has been the easiest and the hardest thing about going through that transition process?
The easiest part was just being myself and answering questions from what I knew. And if I didn't know an answer for someone, I'd say, I don't really know, but here's what I can tell you from personal experience of what it's like. I mean, nobody who, only trans people who go through the process will, or not even all trans people who go through the process, but a lot of people find that they have to go through the experience in order to understand it, and it's hard when you aren't going to go through the experience to understand at times because it's new terminology, new experiences, new thinking, ways of thinking and processes that you view the world around you and how you go about viewing it. It really, the best part I would have to say is being myself and being seen for who I am and not what others used to think of me as.
And what's been the most difficult aspect?
The most difficult aspect is, believe it or not, even here in Olympia, I get insulted quite often for being trans. I'll get people saying, real woman walking here, or, I mean, the worst part is thanking a veteran on Veterans Day for serving our country and getting told that they didn't fight for my freedom. I've experienced that the last 2 years in a row. And it's really disheartening because I know so many veterans that are trans in the Olympia area, which nobody really would believe that there are so many trans veterans, which there are. And it's just, I know that people fought for my freedom, and it's okay, they have their freedom to disagree with who I am, but they shouldn't be able to govern my life because of those disagreements.
Right.
Nor should I be able to govern their life because of my views. So it's just, the hardest part is people being very rude at times, people just going out of their way to be mean and spiteful at times. I mean, it's not all the time, but every time I leave, I at least see someone glancing at me or looking at me weird, trying to clock me, which is trying to see if I pass good or not. And I've had people ask me if I'm trans or call me a tranny or a fag or, something like that. And I'd rather take that abuse or kind of in consideration than ever go
Right.
back to who I was. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a trade-off. I knew that I'd be getting into stuff like, getting
Right.
insulted all the time, but at least I get to be insulted for being me.
What have been the rewards of the experience of transitioning? I mean, obviously being able to live authentically is a big one, but do you find like there are other things that transitioning has brought you that you might not have expected?
Well, one of my favorite memories so far in transition, and it recently happened about a month ago during Lake Fair, as I was driving from downtown to the west side, and I was stuck in traffic because it was stop and go, as you know, with Lake Fair.
Right, yeah.
And this little girl, or probably 10, 12 years old, she was walking down the hill with her mother, and since I was stuck in traffic, I was, smoking a cigarette. But I had my windows down, and she got really excited and was looking towards me, and I turned around to see what she was looking at because, that's nothing else to do in traffic. And I could hear her tell her mom that that's the girl on the TV show I showed you. And she got really excited and waved, and her mom walked over to the car and actually said to me, "Thank you very much. Your show has helped me understand my son," and then corrected herself, my daughter, a lot more. And I thank you for doing what you do. And they just walked off. And so it's like that was the best thing that could happen to me, is inspiring others to live their truth and be truthful and honest with their family and be accepted by their family. Because I've had that in my life, and it's really nice to see that I could help someone else get to that moment too.
That's fantastic. That's you heard it here first. Tea Time in Olympia is making a difference. So, obviously you said before you've experienced, some pushback from the people around you, getting insulted and things like that. Have you encountered discrimination in like employment, healthcare, housing, anything like that?
Well, currently I'm on Social Security, so I'm not really out there in the job field.
Right.
But I have experienced some discrimination. I've experienced it both in going to the bathroom or needing to use a changing room.
Right.
Where they say, "Oh, you're a guy," and I'm like, "No, I'm a girl. See, I'm clearly a girl. I'm dressed as a girl. It's not like I'm trying to be a perv or anything."
Right.
As much time that has been spent on insulting me by random people, as I've also experienced even more acceptance and support and good, kind words saying, "Oh, you're very pretty," or reaffirming who I am by using the proper pronouns and name and all that. So I guess yes, I have experienced some discrimination, but it's not enough to make me give up or some days I do feel pretty bad, but I don't think it's enough to make me give up.
Well, it sounds like there's enough support out there to, maybe balance it out a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, I know that's been my experience too.
Yeah.
That, for every hater, there seem to be 5 or 6 people who want to step up and be supportive.
Yes,
So,
and I've seen that change in the Olympia area throughout my life. I went to an elementary school where they used to beat up the effeminate boys in front of everybody, and nobody cared. And now that's just not even okay. That's just unacceptable, which is a huge step forward in my view, as well as seeing that they have policies in place and that trans students are actually being treated as human beings and not just sock puppets or punching bags anymore. Yes, there are some issues and some moments where that might happen, but overall it's a lot better. I've seen Olympia grow into a more accepting place as I've lived here my entire life.
So what is the most important thing that you want other people to know about your journey, your experience?
As many moments in my life as I was very close to the edge and giving up and jumping off, and there are people out there that do love you. I never thought that I could be who I am and be loved for who I am, and it's still taken me a little bit of time to just get over that because I've spent so many years feeling like I wasn't lovable.
Right.
But I guess if you have someone who's coming out as trans or someone in your family who may be trans and you think that they may be, but you're not sure, then I just want you to know that even if they transition, they are not changing who you love. They're trying to be more of themselves, to love you more and love themselves more. I guess the biggest issue is to not let them feel unloved, because if you love your child, it's better to have a living child than a dead child. And my mother, she did a lot of wrong things. There's a lot of the things that mothers shouldn't do, but she loved me at least. She at least made sure that I knew that she loved me, and that we've gotten past all of that. And I understand that she wasn't doing it out of hate, and she understands that what she did was, looking back in retrospect, we can always tell what was wrong and what was right a lot better than at the time. And there weren't resources like even this show at the time. I mean, I guess my biggest message is to be the change you wish to see in the world, because you are unique and so loved.
All right.
That's my message.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing all of that. And Amy Layton sharing her truth. And thank you very much.
Thank you for helping me share my tea.
Anytime.
Today I'm joined in the studio with Dr. Ellen Hardin, who's going to be sharing a little bit of her truth. Could you tell us your name?
Ellen Marie Hardin.
Lovely middle name there. Lovely name. And how do you identify?
I identify as trans female.
And what are your preferred pronouns? What pronouns do
She
you
and
use?
her.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I was born in the Midwest. I was the last of 10 children. I knew from very early on that something wasn't quite right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I moved to southern Missouri when I was 11 and graduated from high school there, and then went on to medical school and residency in Kansas City.
When did you first realize that you did not identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth?
I had clues as early as 4 years old. Definitely by 6, I knew something was up, that things weren't quite right. But I wasn't able to put my finger on the fact that I identified as the other gender until I started through puberty.
And what feelings or emotions did you have when you realized that you did not identify with the gender that you had?
Well,
That you had been assigned at birth.
I remember when I was 6 years old, I was talking to one of the girls in my first grade class, and we were talking about what it was like to be a girl and what it was like to be a boy. And I realized that I was incredibly jealous of this girl. When I started through puberty, everything that was happening to me felt wrong. So it was then that I was able to say, really I would have been a lot happier if I'd been a girl.
I certainly identify with that. Going through the wrong puberty is a horrible experience. And what age did you finally begin your transition?
I was 44 when I started my transition.
And what has been your experience in finding trans competent healthcare providers?
My experience was not very good. My first provider was an endocrinologist in Oklahoma, and he obviously knew nothing about transgender medicine. The doses of the medication I got were far too high. The monitoring was suboptimal. Basically, I had to teach him about transgender medicine.
Have you ever been married or had a significant other?
Yeah, I was married to a woman for 23 years prior to starting my transition. I came out to my then wife before we were married. I told her at that time that I thought I would have been happier if I'd been born a woman. And she asked me at that time, what are you planning on doing about that? And I said, I'm trying to get along the best I can. And not much else was said for 15 years, and then I raised the issue again because it was becoming unbearable. And 7 years later, I started my transition and we divorced.
Do you have any children?
I have 2 sons who are now adults. They were, 18 and 15 when I started my transition. So my oldest son was leaving for college and my youngest son was a sophomore in high school.
And how did they react? What were their initial reactions?
I think it was stressful for them, but ultimately they both embraced it. Adam, my oldest, took it very well, and when he started college, as part of his freshman composition class, he was asked to write about a meaningful topic, and he wrote about his trans father.
Oh.
And as it turned out, in the school he was in, he got a lot of support for that. My youngest son, who was going to high school in Oklahoma, found it a pretty tough road, and he kind of shut me out for a period of time, but ultimately, after he was struggling in college, he came to live with me, and now he refers to me as the sane parent.
Oh. Sorry, that's really sweet. I'm getting a little emotional and teary over here. And you had the children before transition.
Correct.
And so once you started transition, did you have any custody issues that you faced?
No, my ex-wife and I agreed that we would both have access. It was basically totally up to the children. My ex-wife had a lot of trouble accepting this at the time of my transition, and she attempted to throw roadblocks, but basically the kids didn't let her.
Well, way to go, kids.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's move on to some more general questions.
Okay.
And some of these are a little bit hard for some people to answer or handle, which I totally understand.
Mm-hmm.
But let's start out at the top of the list there. Have you ever been discriminated against?
Early on in my transition, it was common for people to call me names and so forth. I had the experience in Oklahoma after word kind of got out that I was going to transition, of having someone walk up to me on the street and tell me that I was going to hell. I have never been physically attacked, fortunately. I have felt threatened at times.
Have you ever been a victim of abuse or violence?
I have not.
Have you ever been homeless?
I have not.
Have you had a difficult time of maintaining employment?
Fortunately, no. I was pleasantly surprised. When I transitioned, I left Oklahoma and moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, where I started my transition, started living full-time, had facial feminization surgery, and then several months later, after I'd changed all my documentation, I started looking for work, and I had an amazingly easy time. There was only one place that I looked into that said, absolutely not, because you're trans, we are not interested, and therefore I was not interested in them. But I had no difficulty getting employment, and I feel very fortunate that Group Health had an open mind and was willing to hire me.
Do you suffer from depression and anxiety? I know it's very common in the trans community.
I certainly did in the past. For the 3 years prior to my transition, I was very depressed and suicidal. I got up every day not knowing if that would be the day I killed myself. But since then, since my transition, I took antidepressants for a number of years, but I am off of all antidepressants and don't consider myself depressed. And I think I still struggle a little bit with anxiety, but not excessively.
When you are in the depth of depression and anxiety, because it can have a big handle on people, a big control, what were some of the things that you did to help you get out of that funk and try to be a little happier and just get away from the anxiety and stress for a moment?
I must admit that prior to my transition, I didn't cope very well. And I think that I withdrew and hid myself, and that was definitely the wrong thing to do.
Have you ever attempted suicide?
I have not, but I came close. I definitely had a plan, and if I had attempted, I would have succeeded.
Well, I'm glad that you didn't attempt. I'm glad that you're here today. To you, what is the best thing to you about being transgender?
I think for me, the thing that I value the most is being able to be myself, to be who I am. I think it was a long path in coming to that. When I first transitioned, I kind of felt like that I needed to put aside all the things that were typically male and concentrate only on the female things, and I think that was a mistake. I think that I still enjoy computers. I still enjoy woodworking. I enjoy fixing things, which are typically thought of as male pastimes, but that's part of who I am.
We all have both male and female in us. Some of us tip a little more to the side of female. Some of us tip a little bit more to the side of male.
True.
Let's see. What message would you like to share to those viewers out there who are trans in the community?
I think the most important thing I would say is be proud of who you are. I was in the closet for years and years and years, terrified that someone would find out how I felt. And when I finally flung open the door of the closet, I swore I would never go back in the closet. So I'm very out. I'm very open about who I am. I identify as a trans female, and I have sworn that I will never go in the closet again. Be proud of who you are. Live in the world.
To the cisgender members of our community watching today, is there a message that you would like to tell them?
Sure. I think I would particularly like to address this big brouhaha about bathrooms. Trans people go into the bathroom for one thing, to do their business and get out. You don't have to worry about a trans person attacking you in the bathroom. There have been, as near as I can tell, 0 reports of a trans person attacking another person in a restroom in the United States. And I have gone to some trouble to research this. On the other hand, 60% of trans people have reported being attacked or verbally abused while attempting to use the restroom. So this business about, we're protecting our wives and daughters is baloney. This is pure and simple discrimination.
Well put. Very well put. Thank you for sharing that message to the cisgender community. And now I'd like to address all the transgender children out there that may be watching this program. Is there a message you would like to tell those children?
Yeah, I think similar to the Savage campaign for gay youth, I would say it gets better. Even if your parents are unaccepting, you will have an opportunity to live your life as you want to at some point in the future. And your life can be good. Don't give up hope.
Hope is a message that everyone shares and everyone deserves. What has been the most difficult part of your journey through transition?
I I think coping with the depression and coping with the feeling of living in a body that I didn't identify with.
Looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Well, I think if I had it to do over again, I would have better boundaries, and I would insist on being treated with respect sooner than I insisted upon it. And I wouldn't have let my ex-wife dictate what I couldn't do. But overall, I'm pleased with my life, and there's not a lot I would change.
Have you ever found yourself regretting transition?
Never.
That is a common thread amongst a lot of trans people. There are
It
those
is.
out there that are regretful, but for the most part, I've seen everyone just does not regret being themselves.
I agree.
And I want to thank you. I want to take a moment to thank you for coming on here today and sharing your truth, which I know is a very hard and difficult thing for a lot of people to talk about.
You're welcome.
Now, I hope that you learned something new today, because I certainly did.
Hi, I'm Lucas Miller. Welcome back to Tea Time in Olympia. We here at Tea Time like to bring your attention to some of the better resources available to trans people, their friends, their family, and their allies. So today I'd like to tell you about a book that was recently published in 2015. It's called Now What? A Handbook for Families with Transgender Children by Dr. Rex Butt, PhD. This is put out by Transgress Press. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see their website, www.transgresspress.org, which is a local publishing outfit that puts out a lot of good titles for trans and gender nonconforming people. Dr. Butt's book is exactly what it says. It is a very good primer for parents raising a transgender or gender nonconforming child. It has a preface by let me see if I can remember her name here. Catherine Hyde, who is the Mid-Atlantic Volunteer Regional Director for PFLAG, who begins her preface by saying, "This is a book I wish I had had when my child first came out to me." Now this is a good book because it has chapters on everything from what to do when your child first reveals that they are trans or gender nonconforming. It talks a lot about the challenges that parents and family members often go through in learning to accept their child's gender identity or their process of transition. It helps navigate the difficult issues of whether a young child should be put on puberty blockers, how to come out to other family members or members of the community. It talks about the stages that families often go through in accepting their child's gender identity. Like most books of its kind, it includes some talk about terminology, the different words and language that you'll encounter when you are learning more about transgender issues. Butt's list of terms is not necessarily exhaustive, and as always, his definitions may differ a little bit from what other people's definitions are, but it's a very good start if you are new to the language. He talks, in one of his later chapters, he talks a lot about the status of transgender people, the legal and social status in the United States, and also in other countries or cultures. Some of the more recent laws, both nationally and internationally, addressing transgender rights. He cites some of the results of the Injustice at Every Turn survey that was done by the National Center for Transgender Equality and the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force back in 2011. One of the things that makes this book unique for me, among the several books that are now out for parents and families of transgender people, is that it addresses the inadequacy of society's binary gender roles for everybody, not just for trans people, which I think is a subject that's not often gotten into in nearly enough depth in the literature. He has a chapter on helping parents deal with the issue of self-blame. Many parents go through a period of wondering what they did wrong to make their child transgender or gender nonconforming. He does a pretty good job of kind of putting that issue to bed, or helping parents to get past that kind of thinking. He illuminates to some degree the diagnostic criteria in both the DSM-4, which is the old version, and the DSM-5, which is the new version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that lists in the DSM-4 was gender identity disorder and is now gender dysphoria, noting that there are a separate category of both diagnoses for children, and trying to explain some of the criteria needed to diagnose a child with gender dysphoria, which I personally found very helpful, especially in the way that those criteria differ from diagnosing adults. And he outlines the stages of grief and acceptance that parents often go through upon finding out that their child is transgender or gender nonconforming. He likens them to the stages of grief that Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross proposed back in the 1970s. And he includes at the end some information about where the transgender rights movement in the United States is going, and what we can expect for the future. Again, this book is about a year old now. It was published in 2015. So some of the information may be a little bit dated by now, but I recommend this book as a primer for any parent whose child of any age is trans or gender nonconforming, because it really gets in depth into issues that some other books don't address very adequately. So once again, that is Now What? A Handbook for Families with Transgender Children by Dr. Rex Butt, PhD, who is also the father of a transgender young person. And while he does talk somewhat about his own experience as a parent, he also brings in the voices of a lot of other parents of transgender youth, as well as quite a bit of in-depth research into the history of psychology and medicine around the issue of transgender rights, the process of transitioning, and the politics and the transgender rights movement. And all in all, he uses very clear language while not shying away from the issues. Again, this is from Transgress Press, which you can find at www.transgresspress.org, and which carries several other very, very interesting and useful titles by, for, and about transgender people, some of which I hope to be reviewing in the future. But you can order these titles directly off the website. I bought this copy at Gender Odyssey, which is a transgender conference that happens every August in Seattle. And hopefully in the future, we'll see more great titles from Transgress Press and other publishers. And so once again, I'd just like to recommend this book for anyone who has a trans or gender nonconforming child in their family, and who may be struggling with the issues surrounding that. So thanks very much, and we'll see you later on Tea Time in Olympia. Well, it looks like we've reached the end of today's show. We'd like to thank Amy and Dr. Hardin for helping us to better understand some of the issues surrounding the trans and gender nonconforming community.
If you are depressed, suicidal, or just need to talk with someone, you can always contact the Trans Lifeline with the name or with the numbers at the bottom of the screen.
These lines are primarily for transgender people experiencing a crisis. This includes people who may be struggling with their gender identity. While their goal is to prevent self-harm, they welcome the call of any transgender person in need.
Trans Lifeline does their very best to connect you with services that can help meet your needs. If you are not sure whether you should call or not, then you should probably give them a call.
Their hotline is staffed by experts on transgender experience and transgender people themselves. All are transgender identified and educated in the range of difficulties transgender people experience.
And as always, remember that you are loved and you are seen.
Thank you.